Just looks weird looking at yourself like this. I don't like these things. I much
Ladies and
rather be in an
gents,
auditorium with people.
yeah. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode. You guys are getting treated far too nicely at the minute of the AJ Roberts Show. I'm AJ Roberts, as ever, your host, and today I am with none other than Anna de Buisseret, former army officer, common law lawyer, and senior lawyer here in the United Kingdom. Anna, welcome this evening, and thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule, because I know you're inundated with podcast requests and phone calls and messages. People just really want to get as much knowledge from you as they can, because you are an expert in what's going on when it comes to the legal side of stuff. So welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and I've really enjoyed our chats before the show so that we can understand where we're both coming from. So yeah, brief introduction about myself. As you mentioned, I'm a retired army officer. I was a survival instructor. So I spent 9 years in the army. And yes, as some people, the criticisms that come through amidst the support, someone said, well, you were only a territorial army officer. Yes, I was a territorial army officer because I was doing that at the same time as getting my business degree and my law degree, and running both careers at the same time. I ended up going to law school, and I qualified and was called, we say called, it's not called, admitted to the role of solicitors in 1996. And I've been practicing for about 25 years. And what I started off actually in medical negligence, working in the NHS Litigation Authority. So I spent about the first 6 months reading around 2,500 cases of medical negligence, which was very, very revealing because we had to audit them. But then I've also worked in big city law firms where, I've done all kinds of other things. But for the last 15, 20 years of my life, I've been practicing in employment law, but specializing in particular in discrimination, but in particular disability and physical and mental health disabilities. So I have quite a niche practice in that respect, but I do all kinds of employment. So yes, I would very happily talk to people about what's happening in terms of the laws generally that are being broken. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. But also with respect to obviously these awful decisions about mandating vaccines and the coercion being put onto people, but also in respect of our children returning to school and the threat that parents feel is threatening to their children. So yes, do ask me any questions you'd like.
Yeah, and I know all the guys and girls watching have got lots of questions themselves. And on that note, guys, if you do have any questions, please fire them into the chat or into the comments. This is currently live across my personal page, the AJ Roberts Show Facebook page, and the AJ Roberts Show YouTube channel. So please, if you have any sort of personal questions in regards to the legalities of everything going on at the minute, you'd like Anna to cover, and for the benefit of everybody else, because we are in this together, please do so in the chat, and I'll try and get through some as we go through. Also, if you haven't done so already, as ever, my one and only fee, because I make no money out of my podcast, is I ask you guys to share with at least one person. Okay, if everybody shares with one person, those people will share one people, those people will share with people, and what that does is gets this really important message that we're trying to get out to as many people as possible to help them obviously make quite executive decisions for their own futures, for them and their family coming forward, rather than get blindsided by what's potentially coming their way. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to unravel the truth, and we're trying to help as many people as possible along the way. So hit that share button, hit that like, whatever you need to do, okay, and let's spread this message. Anna, we talked briefly before we started the show, and you thought it would be a very, very good idea to explain a timeline of events or historical situation when it comes to the law and the laws that are currently being broken right now. Do you want to shed some light on that? Because you said it's vitally important that people understand sort of like from that standpoint where we were and where we are.
Absolutely. So, as we all know, multiple laws are being broken. I mean, myself and my fellow legal professionals are absolutely horrified and shocked at the multitude of laws being broken, both domestically and internationally. And there are lots of talks about which laws everybody should uphold, whether it should be common law, whether it should be statute law, whether, these kinds of things. Well, the fact of the matter is you need to look at the coronation oath. And if you read the coronation oath of 1953, the sovereign incidentally has sworn this oath in the basic format for at least 1500 years on record. Because the way our constitution runs is that the monarch makes an oath to we the people, and it's a 3 or 4 part oath, and the first part of the oath is about upholding our laws. So that he or she swears to the people that they will uphold God's laws in accordance with the Old and New Testaments and the Gospels, common law, in other words, the law of the land. So that would include common law, acts of parliament, etc., customs and practices, etc. And, all of our existing laws, basically. The second part of the oath is that they will oversee judgment in mercy in all judgment, rather. Okay, because they are the intercessor with God, and that's how God would oversee judgment. So they are required to see judgment in mercy in all matters. And then the third part of the oath is to uphold the church and its privileges and doctrines and sacraments and worship, etc. Now, the point of that is that there's a separation of powers then. The monarch is there to be the intercessor between God and the ultimate authority and the ultimate morality. But then the people's laws keep the monarch in place. And then the church is there to keep everybody in place if they all get, they lose their way. And in between all of that is justice, and justice in all mercy, in all judgments. So that's how we as a society have operated on record for at least 2000 years. So when you look at what's happening in that context, the fact that we have on record being a Christian nation for 2000 years, upholding God's laws, all the other laws that are being made and broken have to be held under God's laws. So any of them that are in conflict with God's laws are not lawful in our Christian nation. So, for example, that's encapsulated in the Hippocratic Oath. And the Hippocratic Oath was written in Greece in around 500 BC. And there's a whole load of wording in the Hippocratic Oath, but it's encapsulated by first do no harm. And it expands on that. You do not administer a poison. You do not take the knife to anyone. You do not give a pessary to cause an abortion. You do not, commit euthanasia, right? So because anyone who learns to become a medic can heal or harm, they can become a psychotic mass murderer, or they can be healing millions with the right treatment plan. So, the fact is that's a sacred oath. And that stems initially from the Bible. Do no harm to each other, love thy neighbour, 10 commandments. You go to the Hippocratic Oath in respect of the medical profession, but in respect of the judiciary, there'll be the judicial oath. In respect of the MPs, there's the parliamentary oath. In respect of the army, as you know, there's an oath of allegiance. And all of those oaths are in place so that we don't harm each other. We uphold the law and we do justice to each other, right? In a moral, ethical society. Fast forward through the centuries, and at various points in history, we've all fought for our various rights. So people talk about the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta in 1215 came after the Charter of Liberties in 1100, which came after the whole code of Anglo-Saxon laws, which came after the Roman laws, etc. So we've always had these codes of laws in place. Fast forward to the Bill of Rights 1688, and we did more work on providing more rights. Fast forward to the 1847, I think it was, and the American Medical Association enshrined some principles of medical ethics, which included the fact that you shouldn't administer a poison and a lot of the elements from the Hippocratic Oath. Right? Fast forward to the Hague Convention, where even in times of war, you can't be horrible to each other and harm each other and conduct experiments on each other. Go to Nuremberg Code, which came out of the Second World War. Same thing. You don't get to experiment on each other. You have to give voluntary consent. Out of that came the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, the convention, the Oviedo Convention, the conventions on human rights and bioethics, case law. And we come to the current point in time where lawyers and judges and parliamentarians, they've put in place all these laws to this point in time. Well, in fact, to the coronavirus 2020, right? And then the Coronavirus 2020 Act 2020 appears. and apparently says that none of those laws exist anymore, absolutely none of them. Well, first of all, the Coronavirus Act 2020 was made under the Public Health Control of Diseases Act, which we lawyers still argue wasn't an actual valid act to claim the rights under in any event. Because
It was pushed very quickly through Parliament as well, wasn't it?
oh, totally. It was presented to
Like
Parliament, this 300-odd bill, which, by the way, would have taken months, which Matt Hancock admitted in the second debate in Parliament, that it had taken them months to draft. Query the timeline. Okay. And it was presented, and the whole House was given, I think, 2 or 3 days to debate it, and then it was passed.
And this is the one that they keep reviewing or renewing every 6 months.
And where they claim to get all the powers to make all these regulations and all these mandates. But actually, it's ultra vires their powers, because, for example, take the vaccine. Under Section 45E of the Public Health Control of Diseases Act, so if you accept that it's an act that they can claim these powers from, rather than the Contingency Act, which it should have been, in my view and lots of other lawyers' view. But even if you do say, okay, well then take the act that you want to claim these powers from, you're claiming it under Section 45E. And actually that says specifically you cannot mandate prophylactic treatment, especially if it's, breaches bodily integrity. You can't fine people. And you certainly can't do anything that goes against our universal rights, one of which is our inalienable right to our body integrity. So these are all laws that fall under each other, but under the basic principle of do no harm. So an employer, for example, mandating an injection, an experimental injection on his employees would, on the face of it, be doing harm to them unless they had conducted a full risk assessment under the health and safety legislation, Article 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Management Regulations 1999, that requires, it's a legal duty placed on an employer to ensure that if they're going to introduce some kind of measure in the workplace, such as a vaccine or a mask or testing, that they ensure that that doesn't cause risk or harm to the individual, because the individual's rights are paramount. They are more, this idea that we should sacrifice ourselves for the collective is not correct. We are all equal under the eyes of God. We're all equal under the rule of law, and we are all sovereign. We don't get to hurt each other for the collective good.
Yeah.
So the requirement is on the employer to ensure that that mandate is not going to harm that individual with their pre-existing conditions and their underlying vulnerabilities, etc. So if they're not complying with all of that, they're not complying with the law.
And what section was that you referred to just a minute ago? 3
of the Health and Safety at Work Management Regulations 1999. And if the employer breaches the Health and Safety at Work legislation, it's not only a civil offence, it's a potentially criminal offence. And the Health and Safety Executive has to go in and investigate the risk of harms to the employees. Because again, under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you have the right to work and earn a living, and you have the right to go into your workplace, therefore, and not be harmed. So that's, then drilled down into with the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which goes into all the details about, health and safety at work, funnily enough, and the health and safety at work assessments. But that also, they're actually a health and safety and mental well-being assessment. So it's not just literally about your physical health. And a lot of these mandates are causing tremendous distress, emotional distress and harm.
And that's all. I think that's the main driver in all of this. It's almost like let's chuck this out there because we've seen it already. So as I was explaining last night with Dolores, like me personally, I'm trained in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP practitioner. Like I saw this stuff coming a mile off, and any other NLP practitioners would have seen it as well. And this is just chucking stuff out there like it could be mandated. You may have to get a vax passport to go on holiday. You could. And that's where people have really gone quite wrong, is they've not looked at the language of this. They've just seen the almost like the fear porn words, as we call them, and just panicked. And, loads of people in my family have done it. Loads of friends have just thought, oh, I might need it for my job, so I went and got it. And that's what's been the thing. And the onus has always been, the government have always put their onus, haven't they? It's shifted the shoulder of responsibility to either the employer or the industry, and then that then rolls downhill, as we've seen, and it just makes most people's lives who would just want to get on and earn a living very uncomfortable. And looking forward for them, all they can potentially see, because they're blinkered by it. And Dolores covered this really well last night. She was saying about, taking a step back and actually assessing the situation, which me and you know is quite a fine art. Obviously, you learn well in the military. Actually assess the situation. What's the facts? What can I do about this? And then go from there, rather than just like run blindly into a potential bear trap, which is why we're doing all these podcasts and interviews and everything else like that. Stop people going into those bear traps. Same with the guys and girls watching. But in regards to the actual employer, and you mentioned the regulations and everything like that, then surely, because this is happening in Australia right now, and you mentioned to me on the phone the other day that Australia comes under very much the same sort of crown laws as we do, as part of the Commonwealth. Like, they are literally gone full Nazi/North Korea on their own people. I've got very good friends in the healthcare sector there who just said, I'm going to have to leave. I've got no choice. They've told us we have to get it. They've got it in writing. In Western Australia, they're being told, if you don't get it, you're going to get fined $20,000. Like,
totally, it's illegal, unlawful, immoral, and unethical. And I'm sorry I had to interrupt, because it makes me so cross, so cross. Because can I just interject there and take you back to the point about the psychological warfare that's being conducted on people?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you and I had a massive advantage in this situation right from the word go, because we have been taught to be in a survival situation and immediately calm our fear, because we know we won't be able to critically think, and then we won't survive. So we had a huge amount of training for that. So when this biological agent was released, we were already massively further ahead than those people who had no survival training and no way to immediately quell their fear. Now, you already picked up on the neurolinguistic programming that has been used, but we've been working, when I say we, the team of people I've been working with for at least, since January of last year, includes a team of expert psychiatrists, psychologists, hypnotherapists, NLP practitioners, and we've been conducting the analysis on, for example, the mind space document. Have people seen this? I've got it here. I was going to show it to people. I didn't bring it. But there's a published document, the mind space document, which actually talks about all the applied and behavioral psychological techniques that are being used on people, right, to make them comply with the agendas that are being rolled out.
Yeah.
But with the people who have analysed this, the experts, the feedback they've given to me is this, and it's a very profound point and very disturbing. They've conducted extensive analysis on the messaging, on the material that's being disseminated, on the adverts, etc. And their overall conclusion is that not a single person in this population is able to give their fully informed consent freely given to these measures due to the psychological warfare, right? So it's not techniques or methods, it is literally military grade warfare that is being conducted on the population. Now, in law, if those techniques are being used on the population so that they cannot give their freely informed consent, then consent is vitiated. It's not valid. You can't claim to have obtained someone's consent from them and at the same time conducted psychological torture on them, which is exactly what's happening. And that's not my personal opinion. I am the mouthpiece. I'm giving you the expert evidence from all the experts I've been working with, not only in the UK, but internationally. And these are top class psychiatrists, they're pediatric psychiatrists, for example. So, if the adult population is not able to give their fully informed consent, can you imagine our children being able to be civic competent? They are not.
Yeah.
And so, frankly, the whole idea that people are happily going along for their injection, people want to comply. Well, no, they're terrified of losing their job. They're going to be fined. Their family's shaming them. They can't go to their football match. They can't go on holiday. They can't see their dying grandparents, right?
Yeah.
That's not freely informed consent. That is coercion. That's coercion, threats, intimidation, guilt tripping, shaming. I could list it all. It's all happening. And all of that vitiates informed consent. Now, the legal implications of that are profound, because on a civil basis, it means that you have harmed people either psychologically, emotionally, with financially, with their job, splitting up families, causing breakdowns in relationships, causing long-term psychological and physical health problems. And we are already watching it unfold. 60% of children have now got a diagnosed mental health problem. Suicide rates have gone through the roof.
Yeah. I was at Dan Gregory's. Yeah, I was at Dan Gregory's Question Everything Summit, and one of the ladies, she's a mental health specialist, works mainly with youngsters and that, and they saw a 90% increase in mental health requirements and appointments made for children over a 6-month period.
And do you know how long the waiting list was even before this pandemic for the children? Years. It's now even longer. So those children who are now becoming temporarily damaged, medium-term damaged, long-term damaged, they're not even going to be able to access the treatment to get themselves better to make the recovery. So can you imagine all those years lost?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is the big question that obviously I ask myself, and I'm sure everyone else does. I mean, you've got people like Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and you've got like the health secretaries, and you've got all these MPs who are clearly got strings attached to their shoulders and fingers, who have children of their own. And I cannot suggest for 1 second that our Prime Minister gets up in the morning and says, yep, another day of treating my nation with the best respect possible, and we're going to get through this together. There's no way. He must feel like shit, like, because he's not the Boris of old. Everybody knows him.
He has a choice. If he feels like shit about what he's doing, Boris Johnson, if you're watching, I'm calling you out. You can stop. Yeah. You can stop. You can cease and desist from continuing to harm the nation, and you should. And the multiple laws that are being broken means that the breach of the parliamentary oath is profound.
Yeah. And in regards to people watching now, obviously, Sarah, who I've put up there, said that you encouraged her on a Facebook group to pursue a discrimination case, and she's very close to being successful.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear. Oh, Sarah, I'm so pleased. Can I just take a minute? I'm actually really, really distressed at the moment, because so many people are sending me messages asking for help and heartbreaking stories, and I would dearly love to help everybody, and I'm finding it awful because I can't actually even respond to people to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but I'll try and find someone who can. So we are actually frantically setting up Lawyers for Action. And what that it will be is, an organization where all the lawyers who are available to take cases will come under that umbrella. We'll put all the templates up, all the protocols, so that, you have a landing place. Because I know it's heartbreaking when you're trying to find a lawyer and you phone around firm after firm after firm. So we're going to have a specialist group of lawyers who can deal with all these issues relating to COVID, but in a proper regulated law firm. Because the problem that we've had as lawyers is we've gone under these campaign groups, but they're not regulated law firms. So we can't then take the work under that. We have to do it under a regulated law firm. And then, of course, there are difficulties with partners and blah. So we're setting up a new one. So we've got websites under construction, but please bear with us. But then we can direct all the traffic to that. And then we'll have the staff. We've actually got, staff coming forward, and other lawyers and paralegals, etc. So I'm sorry, everyone, I can't help at the moment, but we are putting in place something to be able to deal with all of that.
And in general, like, what might people be expected to find on that website once, I imagine the employment side of stuff?
Yeah, well, what we want to do is make all of this legal stuff available for everyone, so that you don't actually have to pay a lawyer to tell you what the law is. And it's terribly difficult to find the law unless you know where to find it and how to read it, etc. So what we're doing, for example, here, I've created a, I don't know whether you can see it, wrong way for the camera. Yeah, this is me going from the Bible through to the latest case law decision all the laws relating to health and informed consent, mental capacity, etc., human rights in relation to health rights. So what we're doing is we'll be creating places where people can go to find out their rights on certain issues. So on Gillet competence, for example, for children, on employment rights, mandatory jabs, etc. And we'll have the law set out for people so they can easily see it with links, so they can go to the actual law if they want to drill in further. But we'll also have template letters, so that you don't have to pay a lawyer to write them for you. And in fact, we've created a lot of them already, to be honest.
Fantastic.
And then there's going to be evidence bundles there that you can submit. So, for example, the open letters from all the campaign groups containing all the evidence and the arguments, so that you don't have to make them yourself. There'll be a whistleblowing part, so that anyone who wants to come forward can be taken through the protection of the whistleblowing legislation, but also so that they can start submitting evidence and we can start taking witness statements from them, because we're doing that all the time already. But again, there'll be a landing pad for people. And then hopefully, we'll have staff who can answer questions and.
And what sort of do you have sort of like a rough lead time on when people might be able to expect to jump on board or get stuck in? I'm sure there's going to be
to help us do it. Yes, please, because it's all hands on deck, and the only reason it's not happening faster is because I can't do everything myself.
Yeah, of
and
course,
so I need people to help do that kind of thing, because if I can't be doing all the legal analysis whilst also trying to set up websites and you know what I mean. There's only so many hours in a day.
Yeah, no, I totally can hear you on that one. I've actually in the process of getting an assistant myself to like do all the podcast editing and stuff like that, because I just do it all on top of my own business. So, I totally get it, and reply to as many DMs as I can. Obviously, the podcast has obviously got quite big now, and I'm getting messages from people every single day with like questions along these lines. Because I'm speaking to doctors, scientists, lawyers, specialists all around the world now. Let's if you wouldn't mind, obviously, especially with our background, I'm getting a lot of messages from either people in the military, people whose children are in the military, they're fairly young soldiers, or partners of, or spouses of people in the military, basically saying that they're either being coerced into getting the vaccination, threatened with their qualifications, really concerned because they can see what's happened in young people, especially males, across the UK now, in the United States, in Israel, and if they survive long-lasting heart issues, these messages I'm just getting on a daily basis. Now, from your expertise, like what can these individuals do in an initial phase to tell their employer that no, they're not going to get it, because like what would be the thing that they need to come back with?
First thing they could come back with is remember Gulf War syndrome. Remember all the other vaccination programs in the military throughout history. And can I take you back to the Rosenthal experiment in 1917-18 that was conducted on military bases in America, where they injected a bacterial pathogen into soldiers and then marched them around flu wards and tried to get them to catch a flu virus. And they found that even under experimental conditions, they couldn't catch the flu virus. But the main cause of death in the Spanish flu, as confirmed by Dr. Anthony Fauci in his 2008 meta-analysis and post-mortem study, was secondary bacterial lung infection. Was it caused by the Rosenthal experiment, or was it caused by an H1N1 flu virus? And nobody's been able to prove that it was a flu virus, but we've got the evidence now that it was a bacterial lung infection. So was that caused by the Rosenthal experiment, for example? We know biowarfare and experiments have gone wrong. I'm not saying the two go together, but we know that's happened for centuries. So, and unfortunately, soldiers are often the first to be experimented on, or not.
Yeah, I had a course of anthrax before going to before Iraq in 2003. I can tell you now that wasn't a nice experience. I think there was about 40, 50 people like just within the squadron that were like man down, like really ill, and there was medics that had to constantly like check up on people and stuff.
Terrible.
And how did that turn out? You know, with the thing, there was no weapons of mass destruction or any sort of threat and stuff like that. And yeah, it was great. So for those of you watching who thought I was anti-vax, you can clearly see I'm not, because I've had like most inoculations that people then have never even had, Hep A, Hep B, blah blah blah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, exactly.
I say to people, I'm not anti-vax. I'm anti an experimental, innovative mRNA technology or adenoviral vector technology for a whole load of reasons. I could then go into why I, am concerned about those. So it's not, that you are one or the other. You can look at a series of treatments, and some of them you think will be good for you, and some of them you will reject. But going back to your question about what do they do on a practical level, what they do is that they insist that the health and safety at work legislation and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights laws and bodily integrity laws are upheld. In other words, they have the right to an individual clinical risk assessment at work by an occupational health physician for their individual risk for this particular injection and what it might do for them as an individual. And they have the legal right for that. And they must not be coerced or sanctioned or threatened or whatever. They must be taken through that proper assessment process.
Terrible. Yeah, and it's one gentleman who's a bomb disposal expert, obviously one of the most dangerous jobs in the forces. He was saying that he was told if he didn't get his jabs, he wouldn't be able to deploy, and if he couldn't deploy, they would take his specialist pay off him.
Well, it's totally illegal and unlawful and unethical and immoral.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think initially the individuals in this position need to say, no, it's not happening. You can't force it or threaten me with my pay or my employment. It's like beyond breaking so many laws, as you mentioned. And you can prove it. I think that's the key thing as well, because there are people like yourself, many of you, who are now, showcasing all of this, these reasons, these laws, and we all know that particular individual in the military who will be saying to their guys and girls, "Oh, you need to go and get this done." They're being made to really shoulder the responsibility, because the government have taken the liability off the pharmaceutical companies. And
No. That's a misunderstanding of the whole liability indemnity issue. And I don't know whether you've now seen the leaked documents, the Pfizer contracts that have been going viral on the web.
No, I haven't seen it, no.
They've been leaked. So now the contracts, which were meant to be confidential, have been leaked into the public domain, and it deals with that indemnity provision. Can I say also that I used to negotiate contracts like that for my sins when I was working in a big city law firm. We used to wade our way through contracts like that. So, acting on both sides, I can see that some of those indemnity provisions I would insist on putting in a contract. They're fair enough. They do limit the liability because, for example, when their product leaves the factory, they don't know how it's going to be transported or distributed or stored. So if it becomes damaged by that process, then really that's not the manufacturer's fault. If, however, the manufacturer has not, marketed its product in accordance with its license, for example, the Pfizer product does not have a marketing authority, okay? And it is only an emergency temporary authorization. It is not a fully authorized and licensed product. So any kind of misrepresentation or fraud, etc., then obviously they would still be liable, because they can't claim an indemnity on the basis it turns out to be fraudulent or negligent or whatever. So the indemnity clauses do have to be tied up very carefully. But no, ultimately the principle is, again, do no harm. If you've been harmed by the product, you have to find out how you were harmed. So it could have been because it wasn't stored properly, or because it wasn't administered properly, or because you weren't warned of all the material risks, or because you had been lied to in the process of what it was going to do to you, etc., etc. So when you get harmed by something or somebody, obviously you have to work out where it's come from, the causation. And in which case, obviously, if you're someone who could be blamed, you would want to limit your liability and require an indemnity for things that weren't your fault.
Yeah.
But equally, you can't get an indemnity for things that actually are your fault.
Yeah, and this is what we were talking about with Dolores last night. She went into a lot of great detail about stuff like this.
Can I just say though, one of the things about those contracts is that is why the coercion and why the threats and why the pressure is so strong, because those contracts require the purchasers, the participating member states, to comply with the contractual provisions, which require the temporary authorization to stay in place, which requires the testing to continue so that we all think that there's an emergency. It requires that there's no alternative available treatments. Well, there are. We all now know that there are plenty of alternative treatments. For those who don't know, I'm now working on the International Health Council. Yes, it has only just been formulated, but it's an umbrella council to involve World Doctors Alliance, American Doctors for Freedom, Doctors for COVID Ethics, etc. All of us to come under an umbrella, do our own thing, but feed into what we're doing. So I attended a meeting on Monday night, 2-hour meeting with 48 people from around the world. And we discussed a lot of these things. And, we are all very much in agreement around the world that every single jurisdiction is under the same messaging, the same coercion, the same sanctions, the same bribes. This is, apparently every single country has signed a similar contract, which is why we are seeing an orchestrated agenda across the world.
Yeah.
That is in accordance with these contractual provisions.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is quite alarming. And at this, but we're seeing the effects of it like every day, aren't we? You need to go into town, and as I mentioned last night, it's been one of my biggest bugbears. Really, is seeing so many amazing elderly people that built this country up, just walking around in so much fear that there's like a deadly virus
it breaks my heart
on potentially anybody that walks past because of the whole fear that's been struck into people about asymptomatic spread, which again has been just debunked time and time and time again.
Can I just say one thing that breaks my heart is watching people walking around in masks, having been told that they protect them when they don't, and all the evidence shows that. And I've got 123 years worth of scientific research studies that prove that masks, except the FFP3, the full face respirator, cannot stop a virus particle this small, right? So, and it increases the risk of transmission because it transforms them from droplets into aerosols, which travel further on the air currents. And they cause multiple harms. They cause multiple permanent organ damage.
Yeah.
They are actually, on our legal evidence, they constitute a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Code. That's what they constitute on the evidence. It is criminal to put those on your children. Criminal. And when I say criminal, that's not metaphoric. I'm talking about crimes against humanity under the International Criminal Court's code.
Yep.
And it is a crime according to our own criminal code, because you are intentionally causing harm, which is resulting in suffering, loss, cognitive impairment, psychological damage. The evidence is there. So people who still claim that they don't know about the harms, they do, because knowledge will be imputed, because it's all there. There have been various court cases around the world proving the harms of mask wearing for children and for adults, but particularly for children, because their bodies are growing, their organs struggle more. It causes disproportionate damage for children. It's heartbreaking.
It is truly, and obviously as a father myself, it really is. And I just want to set the record straight here, the guys and girls for you watching who have, stated that I only get like one side of the fence guests on and very biased towards this. There's nothing biased about what you just said there. It is 100%.
Well, can I just say,
there's no two sides to it.
Something there to clarify this? I started off this journey into masks because my children were insisting on wearing them. And I'd already been told by my best friend, who's a health and safety inspector, that all the masks were useless except for the FFP3. And he said, and I'm sure there are some risks to them as well. I know there are. So we went down a journey so I could prove to my children the risks it would cause them. And I could not believe the rabbit hole I went down. 123 years of mask wearing and 123 years worth of studies showing the multiple harms that they cause. What I did was the opposite of what the authorities and the government and the WHO has done. I cherry-picked the data, looking for the harms, and found them, multiple, right? And then I compared them to the studies that we were being told to believe. And I'm not going to make accusations on there, but I was disgusted.
Yeah, and this just backs up exactly what this nurse was saying to me that I spoke to in London in great detail. Like, in her hospital now, they had 400% increase in heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots, all in people aged under 40, all double jab. But their ICU wasn't filled up with anybody with COVID, not a single case. And she said they hadn't had one the whole time, but they were full of people with bacterial lung infections from wearing masks all day, every day. And you can, like you said, the evidence and the science is all there, but people, this video I saw the other day is fantastic. This doctor was explaining that most people would believe your anus is the dirtiest place in your body, where it's not, it's your mouth. And said if you're covering it up all day, you're literally creating, common sense corner here tells you for infection.
Do you know how long they've known that? In 1920, the US Surgeon General made a statement about the harms of mask wearing and the uselessness of them and the fact that they increase infection. And he based that because there was a Dr. W.H. Kellogg who in 1918, 1919 did a meta-analysis of the mask mandates and the flu infection rates and found that those states that had a mask had an increased death rate. And he then did a study. He then produced a peer-reviewed paper saying that they increase the risk of transmission. They are a bacterial problem. And then, of course, we now know, as I say, back to 2008, Fauci's report, they died of secondary bacterial lung infections, the same thing we're seeing now in the hospitals. And they've known that since 1918, 1919, 1920, with evidence. I can prove it. So they've known.
And one of the questions I wanted to bring up here is the lady's husband has been forced to wear a mask at work. Like, can he refuse this?
Yes, he can. First of all, they have got no lawful, legal, moral, or ethical right to make him wear a mask, especially given the evidence I've just told you. But had they given him an individual risk assessment for the harms of mask wearing, based on the evidence I've just told you, and I can prove it, I've got lever arch files full of it, of the actual original studies, where I've just highlighted the bits of their findings.
Do you have the key points on like PDFs and stuff like that? Because it would be fantastic, obviously, to share.
Well, I've actually created about a 70-page document where I've lifted out the key harms from the research studies, and it's all fully referenced. I haven't quite finished it. I could just put it out there and let other people finish it as a working document. Probably should. I should stop being perfectionist and just get it out there.
Oh, I know what that's like. That's the
yes, you could then print that off and take it to the occupational health department in your company. And if you haven't got an occupational health department, they'll have to pay for an outside one. And you say, look, there we go, 70 pages of all the harms to me that these masks will cause. Now prove to me that they won't. Because unless you can prove to me that they won't harm me, you are illegally and unlawfully and unethically and immorally harming me by making me wear one.
And this is, again, it all comes back to the key thing about the individual's ability to stand up and say no. And this is what's not been happening. I was having a chat with my wife the other week, and I said, if we went to Tesco's and we shut the doors and said, right, everyone, let's have a chat. Who here is only wearing a mask purely because you don't want to be, you can't be doing a confrontation that you're worried about someone asking you where your mask is, and you feel like you're lying and stuff like that, and it's easier just to chuck one on your face. Probably about 80-90% of people would put their hand up, and that's where we're at. It's just not having that, and this is why these podcasts are so important, to get people on like yourself, to give people that little bit of inspiration and moving forward, that they can say no. And this is where we're at as a country, regardless of your like vaccination status. We are at a point where we need to say no more, like kind of like what France are doing. But this issue with the passports, they've now, they did a U-turn 3 weeks after saying they wouldn't be vaccinating kids, after they sacked the guys that basically advised them to not vaccinate kids. All these kind of things. And then the same people are obviously advertising that Thorpe Parks, like little pop-up vaccination centres in Thorpe Park.
Terrible. That's outrageous. That's absolutely outrageous. Can I take a moment to explain that further?
Yeah, sure.
Under the informed consent rules, someone has to have the capacity to consent. And the capacity must not be, in fact, can I read this out to you? Because I thought this is something that people really need to hear. So under our Mental Capacity Act 2005, there's a presumption that people have a mental capacity to give their consent to treatment or to whatever's happening, unless proved otherwise. But then there's also in section 2, people who lack capacity. Now I'm reading this wording because it's very, very specific rather than summarizing it for you. For the purposes of this act, a person lacks capacity in relation to a matter if at the material time, you think about turning up, being offered the injection, he is unable to make a decision for himself in relation to the matter because of an impairment of or a disturbance in the functioning of the mind or brain. Now, these clinics have popped up at festivals. How many people stay sober throughout a festival? How many people don't get peer pressured or guilt tripped or shamed at a festival? What are the chances that someone has walked into that clinic stone cold sober, asked for a clinical risk assessment, being given all the material risks, being given time to consider them, have the necessary allergy tests because of their risk factors, and make an informed consent decision? They can't. No. It's illegal, it's unlawful, it's immoral, it's unethical. Same with Thorpe Park, same with anywhere where someone can't actually give a proper decision. Because when you look at the patient information leaflets, what they actually say is that you should have this leaflet before. And when they say before, what they should have said is weeks before. Because actually, what it also says is it warns of risks. It says, for example, there's the risk of severe anaphylactic shock. Well, we now know lots of people have died from a severe allergic reaction to these injections. The manufacturer warns people of that. And what it says is you should have an allergy test for the active ingredient, which for Pfizer is BN162B. How many people know what that ingredient is? And to the other ingredients. There are about 10 ingredients. I went on Twitter and I said, please, will you tell me what each of these ingredients are? Because I need an allergy test. Nobody could tell me what most of the ingredients were. They didn't know where to find out what the ingredients were. They didn't know what those ingredients would do to their body. They didn't know if they would be allergic to them. And they certainly didn't know what those ingredients would do in combination to their body and in combination with another combination of drugs from a different dose, from a different manufacturer. Nobody I've spoken to and taken evidence from has been able to tell me all of the ingredients, what they are, what they're going to do to their body, and whether they're going to be allergic to them. And yet, the manufacturer's patient information leaflet specifically says you must get an allergy test. Where are these allergy tests? And the problem is that there are several ingredients in the Pfizer one, for example, that we know of, PEG, where around 80% of the population are already have an immune response to it because it's in toothpaste, it's in cosmetics, it's in ice cream. You stick more of PEG into somebody's body that's already got immunity, and they will get an over-exaggerated immune response.
Which is why a lot of people who have already allegedly had COVID and then get the vaccination and are very ill afterwards.
Because they've already got an immunity.
Yeah.
So,
and this is what really bothers me because, I'm seeing it everywhere at the minute. And I use the app Clubhouse quite a lot for business and networking. And I was in a room last night after I'd done the podcast, and it was all about vaccination and hesitancy. So I was like, let's see what's on here. And it was like four or five junior molecular biology students on the stage in Clubhouse. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Clubhouse, it's an audio chat room app where you can go into like-minded rooms where obviously the discussions in the title. The people who set the room up are on a stage. They talk about X, Y, and Z, and obviously people can come up onto the stage if they're allowed to ask questions, this, that, and the other. they were talking literally the opposites of what Dr. Fleming, Dr. Jane Ruby, yourself, Dolores Cahill, and everybody else I've had on the podcast on last night about these vaccines, and that they've been rigorously tried and tested. They're really good for you. And even if you've had COVID, the best thing you could do is still get it to add to, you'll be even more super immune. This is like the language they were using, and these are actually like science students and stuff like that. And I was like, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. I was trying to get up on the stage, and that, I don't know if any of them knew me, but they wouldn't let me up. And I was just like, I can't believe this is happening.
Well, I can explain partly of why that's happening. Again, you take the patient information leaflet. That's what the manufacturer is telling you about their product, not what the NHS is telling you, not what the scientists are telling you, not what the teachers are telling you. It's what the manufacturer of the product is telling you. When you read that patient information leaflet, it does warn of the risks. It doesn't warn of all of them because, of course, those are recorded on the various reporting systems like Yellow Card and VAERS and Eurovigilance, right? So they warn of the main ones that came out of their phase 1 safety trials. The phase 2 and the phase 3 trial is ongoing. This is the phase 2, phase 3 trial, and it's going to end in 2023. So this is de facto an experiment. So given it is an experiment on live human beings, particularly healthy ones, of all ages and of all preconditions, it has to be conducted with extremely special care, including telling the people that it is a live human experiment, including following the Nuremberg Code and the Code of Medical Ethics. People have to volunteer. It has to be freely informed of all the material risks. Now, the material risks include death. They include severe disability like blindness, like deafness, like, strokes. Now, when people are talking about what they can do with their employer, actually, there's a brilliant letter that I don't know whether everyone's seen yet, where we could talk about all of this for hours, but this, if you can see it.
Yes, I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah, that is an open letter, Read the Vaccination Mandate, and it goes into a lot of this in a lot more detail. But basically, and it says in here, it confirms the fact that, this is a live human experiment. You need to tell people it's a live human experiment. You need to tell them what the treatment is, what it's going to do to them, what the efficacy is going to be. And the efficacy studies have been misrepresented as well. What the long-term risks are, including for example, risks on fertility. And we know from the biodistribution study done by Japan that, these products are bioactive. So in other words, they don't stay on the site. They go into all of the organs of the body.
Yeah.
And in particular, they're concentrated in the ovary and the testes.
Yeah.
And that we've already seen problems with people losing their babies, and etc. So
Dolores covered that last night.
Detail that we don't have time to go into is in here. But
what's the title of that letter? So people could
open letter, revaccination mandates by employers for employees or potential employees. What it also says, I need to go and get my charger. Sorry.
Who's on the letterhead? So who's actually written the letter?
UK Medical Freedom Alliance, Lawyers for Liberty, Workers of England Union.
UK Medical Freedom
I'm going to have to run with everybody down to get my charger. I'm so sorry. This is very unprofessional of me. I've left my charger downstairs.
It's absolutely fine, Dolores. I'm sure everybody doesn't mind you giving us a lot of valuable information.
Can I just also say, though, in terms of the employment situation contract, unless there is an express clause in the contract that says that your employer can mandate whichever vaccine they like to you, they cannot unilaterally mandate that you have to take a vaccine. That, again, that would be a breach of contract, right? So they would have to, as I say, because they're not allowed to unilaterally impose it on you, that it would have to be reasonable to ask you to do it. And it can only be reasonable to ask you to do it if they've assessed you for your risk of harm. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
sorry,
absolutely.
folks, hold on. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
back here. Just plugging in.
So,
That was
so
an important point. Sorry.
One question
Sorry,
I've got.
everybody.
One question I've got, Anna, is, and this is based on a lot of the conversations I've been having with a lot of people. Obviously, we keep making references to the Nuremberg Code being broken on all levels, like all 10 of them. And one of my friends said to me, like, he feels that we're at a point where we're just stood there waving this Nuremberg Code in the air, saying you're breaking this, you're breaking this, and they're just looking at us saying, like, and don't care, because we're not seeing anything done about them breaking the Nuremberg Code on at any level at this stage. Like, where do you? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Because we all know that the Nuremberg Code's being broken on many levels. We all know, well, we know that the people who are carrying out these medical interventions, even the people who are vaccinating people, not giving informed consent, etc., are breaking a number of Nuremberg codes. We know that as fact. Like, if my wife, for example, went down to the local vaccination centre and she was injected by a nurse there that didn't give him informed consent, or was just a volunteer, done a little vaccination course, which some of them have done, and she had really adverse reactions, like, what could I do in a short space of time to basically show liability towards that person that did that because they didn't give informed consent and break the Nuremberg Code?
Yeah, well, this is where the notice of liabilities comes in. So essentially what you do as the person, well, can I take you back a step, actually? You talk about the liability of the vaccinator. And a lot of vaccinators have become very upset about this talk about the Nuremberg Code and said, why are you talking about the Third Reich? We're not. We're talking about a case law decision, the judgment of the International Military Tribunal in the medical cases which were run against doctors and nurses and other health professionals who were conducting human experiments on people. Now, whether you conduct those under the Third Reich in the 30s and 40s, or whether you do it today, or whether you do it in 30 years' time, is not the point. The point is that a human being is conducting an experiment on another human being. And therefore, there has to be a whole load of rules around that.
Yeah.
So that's why we're citing the Nuremberg, because there's a 900-page judgment, which, I've shortened. I've taken out the key bits so that people can read it to a much shorter format. But basically what they do is they get each doctor and each nurse up on the stand and they ask them what experiments they were conducting on people, and they found out whether or not those were willing volunteers, whether they were harmed, whether it was ethical experimentation or not, etc. And those who had not followed the medical code of conduct and ethics and were found guilty, some of them were imprisoned, and some of them, they suffered the death penalty, and the death penalty in those days was by hanging.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at our criminal code, under the Offences Against the Person Act, Section 20 is wounding. Now, what happens on the criminal legal analysis is that when an injector puts a needle into someone's arm, they've broken the continuity of the skin. In other words, they've wounded someone. And they've committed the act, and they've also done it deliberately. So they've done it with intent. Now, what happens after that is a matter of chance. So whether someone becomes harmed or they become disabled or they die, the person who has injected them is the person who has caused that. Which is why you don't inject someone without obtaining their fully informed consent, because the only way it's lawful to do that, to wound someone intentionally, is if they've fully consented to it. They knew that they were going to be wounded. They knew it was the material risks of the wounding. They were volunteering. They had no coercion, no pressure. They were happy for you to wound them. So, but if you didn't tell them of the material risks, the fact that they became disabled, if you told them, like the NHS is telling everyone on their websites, you'll just get a headache and a sore arm and a fever. But you don't say, well, actually, you need to look at the latest figures on the yellow card scheme, because that's our official reporting scheme. And unfortunately, you'll see from there that at least 1,500 people have died. So there is a material risk of death. There's also a material risk of all the other things that are listed on there: myocarditis, encephalitis, as I say, neurological problems, strokes, paralysis, tremors, So these are material risks to people. They need to be told that those are risks. And if they are not told, they haven't consented to that risk.
So in regards to that, if I'm just using my wife as reference, if my wife obviously had a really bad episode or it caused seizures, because we've seen that happen multiple times, for example, she's left potentially paralyzed, what immediate or any adverse reaction, and they weren't given informed consent, what is the immediate legal thing that I could do?
Yeah, so that what you need to do is you need to establish who it was who actually injected you, because that's the living man or woman. So
Okay.
as a person, they're the person who injected you. So you need to find out who that was. You need to obviously know what product it was, so that you can then find out whether it was the way it was stored that was harm, that ended up in the harm, or whether it was the fact that you didn't have, you weren't given a risk assessment, you didn't have an allergy test, whether it was because, it had been transported faultily, whatever the reason is, somebody put that product into your arm and you've ended up hurt. So you issue that person with a notice of liability, but you also list the other people who would be responsible vicariously. So, for example, the clinic manager, the NHS, Public Health England, the Department of Health, because they're all responsible for making sure this doesn't happen. Because the vaccinator is trained by NHS England under the training materials that are produced by Public Health England. As I understand it, they get a 3-hour session on informed consent. So if they did go to that training session, then they will have no lawful excuse not to have taken someone through the informed consent. I mean, they wouldn't have a lawful excuse anyway, but do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, sorry, I'm tired. Am I making sense?
No, that's fine, honestly. So my next question from that would be, like, obviously I've then issued that notice of liability.
Oh yeah, sorry, the notice of liability. You find out who's done it, and then what you do is you say, the reason I'm issuing you with this notice of liability is not intended to cause you harm, distress, or suffering, but to put you on notice of your potential liability in both civil and criminal law, because on the evidence you are causing harm. Okay, so you then set out your list of allegations about the harm that's happening. So you're not handing out the patient information leaflet, you're not giving a clinical risk assessment, you're not taking people through the ingredients to check whether they're allergic to them, etc., etc. So you set out all the allegations of why you think you need to serve this notice on them. And then you encapsulate the law, why this is a breach of these laws. And then at the back, you say, I need evidence that, that's not going to harm me. I need evidence that it's safe and effective. I need evidence that, it's going to reduce transmission, because on the evidence I have, I can't see that what you're saying is correct. So you do a call for evidence at the end. And then again, you finish off by saying that, you need to understand that this liability is personal to you. The buck stops there, effectively. It's personal, civil, and criminal liability. Because what you want to do with these notices is to stop people doing it to another person.
Yeah.
Right. And to hold them liable for the harm they've done to you or to your relative. But if people don't know they're breaking the law, they're going to carry on doing it. But the problem that they face is that ignorance of the law is no defense.
Yes.
But what you want to do is tell people the law so that they can uphold it and stop breaking it and stop harming people. So we've drafted a notice of liability, but it's ever growing, because the evidence and everything is constantly growing, and the legal analysis is vast and the evidence is vast. So this week we're hoping to circulate it to the International Health Council. Various members on that have said they'll happily review it. And then again, that will be a template for people to use. Okay. I'm afraid it's about 60 pages at the moment, so it's not a succinct little number. And the reason for that is because we've seen lots of notice of liability being circulated. And frankly, if all you say is, you're breaking the law and you should uphold our human rights, etc., it's not really going to inform people and make them better, I understand what's going on. Whereas this actually sets out as much as we possibly can. If people don't read it, that's their lookout. But they've now been put on notice. And the beauty of that is you've fixed a moment in time where you can prove that you told someone, and you gave them all the evidence, and you told them what the law is, and you've told them to stop doing it. cease and desist. If they carry on, you can prove in a future court of law that they jolly well did know, because you told them, and you told them everything.
Yeah. And from a parent's point of view, because this is a big one, obviously they've already said that, or they've already opened it up to 16, 17-year-olds. There's already correspondence and dialogue being made between schools and parents in certain areas of the country that it's very likely that 12 to 15-year-olds would be next. From a head teacher's point of view or a teacher's point of view, whether they agree with it or not, obviously there's going to be a lot of parents that are going to be extremely upset about this. The fact that the head teacher allows it to happen, given the risks far outweigh the dangers, far outweigh of these vaccines in children, far outweigh than what they do with COVID. We already know that. Robert Malone said that clearly on a podcast, Richard Fleming, etc., etc. We know that the evidence is clearly there. Where do these head teachers and people of responsibility stand in terms of the legalities of all and just allowing it to happen?
Extremely precariously. In summary, we're sending out notices of liability to the Board of Governors, the head teacher, and the deputy head of every school in England, because they really need to read our notice. It sets it all out in there, their personal, civil, and criminal pending liability should they proceed. Okay, it's very, very serious. And what I would draw everyone's attention to now, I wanted to actually read you something again, because the latest case law decision we have on children's ability to consent to medical treatment in this country is called Bell and Tavistock. And it was a judgment that was passed down on the 1st of December 2020. So it's very, very, very fresh. And basically what it was, it's a case against a trust of a child who's now an adult, but at the time they were a teenager. And the case is actually about transgender puberty blockers. But it applies because essentially what we're talking about is puberty blocker being a treatment for a condition or whatever. So it doesn't matter that it was transgender and it was puberty blockers. What it matters is that children from the age of 10 to 18 were being assessed for their competence to agree to this treatment. So what the court does is look at it all. And what they say is, well, actually, what have you got in place as a trust to make sure that these children can consent to this medical treatment when there are no long-term very little long-term safety data? It's still an experimental treatment. It might affect their fertility. They actually don't know whether they're going to change their mind about the treatment at some future point. And the trust said, oh, no, don't worry. We've dealt with all that. We've spent 2 years coming up with a standard operating procedure, which I'm suggesting we should all be relying on. And the standing operating procedure says that basically all efforts will be made under 2 sessions with a child from 10 to 18. So 2 separate counselling sessions to go through the long-term consequences of the medical treatment, the implications on fertility, the decision whether the child is Gillick competent would be jointly made between the endocrine team in that example. So this would be the, immunology team and the psychology teams. Now, bearing in mind what we said about the capacity to give consent given the psychological warfare, can you imagine the children's ability to do that? And I'll pick up on that in more detail in a minute. But then also the limited scientific data for the long-term benefits versus the potential harm. So in actual fact, the risk-benefit analysis. And then the concerns re the person continuing to identify as having made the right decision. So bearing in mind, for example, with the Pfizer one, this is a synthetic piece of code that is going to permanently change your coding. Well, a child at 15 might think, yeah, that's a great idea. I love that idea. Can you imagine at 25 if they still think that? They may not. Yeah. So, that's a standard operating procedure that NHS trusts have in place dated the 31st of January 2020. Now, that standard operating procedure is clearly not being applied, is it, for these injections for children?
No, so on the bus, off the bus, on the bus, off the bus, isn't it?
Right. Okay. So I'll go on to say that it also says the service specification includes section 3.2 on informed consent. This says the consequences of treatment decisions can be significant and life-changing. Indeed, we already know children have sadly died from these injections. And it says all efforts will be made to ensure that clients are aware of the longer-term consequences. So that's the first thing they say. But there are no long-term safety data for these kids. So how can, according to the NHS's own service specification on informed consent, how can they be breaching it? So this is it's a very serious issue. Now, one of the doctors gave evidence, and it says, in advance of any referral by the trust of a young person for consideration for treatment, the clinicians discuss the treatment. So not an injector. A clinician will discuss the treatment with the young person. This includes checking that the young person's hope for treatment are realistic. So most of the children I know who are consenting it to at age 16 says, yeah, it's safe, it will protect me and everyone around me, and it won't harm me. That's not realistic, because that's not what the evidence shows. Explaining what the treatments can and cannot do, discussing any potential side effects, discussing fertility and the potential impact on genital development, which this one injection does have. Yes. Okay. So then they go into more detail about that, but they take evidence also in this case from a psychiatrist. And she says something very, very interesting. She says, relevant to the evidence, in the judgment, it says, relevant to the evidence of consent is the evidence of Professor Scott, Director of University College London's Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience. So she seeks to explain from a neuroscientific point of view why I have significant doubts about the ability of young people under the age of 18 years old to adequately weigh and appreciate the significant consequences that will result from the decision to accept hormonal treatment for gender dysphoria. We'll change the hormonal treatment, to change that to gene treatment for SARS-CoV-2. She explained the neurological development of adolescents' brains that lead to teenagers making different, more risky decisions than adults. She said further that this is backed up by behavioral studies showing that when decision-making is hot, i.e. more emotional, which this is, you're going to kill your grandparents, you're going to kill your parents, you can't see your friends unless you do this. Under 18-year-olds make less rational decisions than when the responses are made in a colder, less emotional context. Well, we've seen the messaging around this for children. It's, on fire. Not hot, it's on fire. And her conclusion was that given the risk of puberty blocking treatment, gene therapy treatment, and the fact that these will have irreversible effects that have lifelong consequences, it is my view that even if the risks were well explained, that in the light of the scientific literature, it's very possible for an adolescent to be unable to fully grasp the implications of gene therapy treatment. All the evidence we have suggests that the complex emotionally charged decisions required to engage with this treatment are not yet acquired as a skill at this age, both in terms of brain maturation and in terms of behavior. And she goes on and gives her evidence about that. And the overall conclusion of the case is this. A child under 16 may only consent to the use, sorry, that's my dog, Bumblsh. A child under 16 may only consent to the use of medication intended to gene treatment where he or she is competent to understand the nature of the treatment. Most adults don't understand the nature of this treatment. That includes an understanding of the immediate and long-term consequences of the treatment. Well, there are no long-term consequences. We don't know them. The limited evidence available to its efficacy or purpose, again, we've got false efficacy data, and its potential life-changing consequences for a child. There will be enormous difficulties in a child under 16 understanding and weighing up this information and deciding whether to consent to the use of this treatment. It's highly unlikely that a child aged 13 or under would be competent, so that takes the 12-year-olds, to give consent to the administration of such treatment. It's doubtful that a child aged 14 or 15 could understand and weigh the long-term risks and consequences of the administration of the treatment. And then it says, in respect of young persons aged 16 and over, the legal position is that there is a presumption that they have the ability to consent to medical treatment. But that's only if they know the long-term consequences of the intervention and that the treatment is innovative and experimental, which most people are not being told. They're being told it's safe and it's effective and it's fully tested.
Yeah.
So that's the latest case law decision in our country. And I've read you the standing operating procedures of the trust, NHS Trust. I think that's pretty clear that unless schools apply that to this injection, they will be breaking, not only the standard operating procedures of the trust, but of our own case law decision and the other laws I've discussed. So those notices of liability have to be sent to them pretty damn quickly, because at this point in time, they stand to be both held personally and criminally liable if these go ahead, given what I've said with all the evidence.
From your expert opinion and experience, and obviously the conversations that you have on a daily basis with all your colleagues around the world, we're seeing multiple laws nationally and internationally being broken on a grand scale, especially by certain MPs. Are you confident that we will see arrests?
No pressure there then. Well, to be honest, the way I explain it to people is this. Before the MPs are allowed to sit in the House of Commons and debate and to draw down their salary from us, we the people, because they are our public servants, they have to swear an oath, which is the parliamentary oath. And that parliamentary oath obviously is to uphold all of our laws. And the ministerial code also specifically says they have to uphold all of our laws and not discriminate, which of course they are doing against people who can't get vaccinated, etc., shaming them, telling them that they must do it. I mean, goodness me, how many times have we all been nagged to take this injection, for goodness sake? So they are clearly in breach of their parliamentary oath. So whether that should follow with arrests or not depends on whether or not the arrest would be lawful. And a lawful arrest could be executed with reasonable force under our criminal code. But you would have to prove, of course, that the person needed to be lawfully arrested because they were breaking all the laws. So the first thing to do is to serve notices of liability on the MPs to again warn them of the laws that they are breaking. And of course, that's not one size fits all, because some MPs have been standing up, some MPs have been doing the right thing. So it's a matter of identifying the ones who are the perpetrators, the aiders and abettors, and the ones who are staying silent and omitting to act and being compliant, because that is all criminal activity. Because under the law, acting and causing harm is the same as omitting to stop harm from happening.
I see.
Staying quiet is omitting to prevent harm, suffering, loss, and death.
Yeah. Do you believe that there is a judge in the land that would take this on? Because obviously I was speaking to some high profile lawyers just in conversation, the ones I met at the Question Everything Summit. That was one of the key concerns.
It's a concern that every single person says to me, sadly. And it's a concern that every lawyer in their jurisdictions around the world has said, apart from Malaysia and South Africa. So there is a concern from pretty much everybody I've spoken to, fellow professionals and we the public, that we would be trying hard to find a judge who would be objective, who would be, not upholding some kind of agenda. But I don't say that deliberately, because as I've just said, we've had psychological warfare conducted on us. So I'm not in the bar, but I do have friends who are judges, and I know people who have got friends who are judges and partners who are judges. And the intel is this, that a number of them, unfortunately, have succumbed to the narrative, and they literally believe the narrative. And so bringing any contrary evidence in front of them is going to be a huge shock, because it's so against everything they've been told and they believe. So there's evidence that there are certain members of the judiciary who fall into that category. And indeed, I know a couple. And I've tried so hard, but it just goes nowhere. And then you've got those who I think are very, very confused, because like all of us, we have been inundated with so much evidence and scientists and experts saying this, that, and the other, that frankly, if you're busy doing your day job, how do you have time to do all the things that I'm spending my whole time doing? Because actually you're administering cases and running your family and all the rest of it. So they may only be fence sitters because of lack of evidence and information. And in fact, they may be desperate for us lawyers to bring it in front of them so they can look at it all, right? Because we know that evidence has been censored. We know that public debate hasn't happened. So, you know, the fact is that we have been getting this one-sided narrative. And then there are those who are fighting, you know, they are trying to make the right decisions, and they are, you know, not allowing masks in their court whilst they're in there and that kind of thing, because they know they're harmful, and they are upholding the health and safety laws, and they are making a stand. So again, like every profession, there's a mixed bag.
Yeah, and I think you know, I know everyone's on the same, or sorry, on a different page when it comes to that. And I've actually got a appointment with my local MP end of next week. He was very quick to put his hand up and vote for mandatory vaccinations for healthcare workers. So I booked in a conversation with him and a meeting, because what I'm going to show him will hopefully change his mind. You know, I'd urge people to do the same. I'm not saying every MP is the same. Obviously, I've got correspondence and dialogue with like Sir Graham Brady and people like that who have had on the show before, who are very much in the same page as we are. It's just trying to give people some, like, a little bit of faith, something to hold on to, that there's someone's going to you know, set something off. And I think obviously, you know whether that's in Australia or Canada or here, people want to see things happen as soon as possible, and you know, hopefully kick off a you know, really positive chain of events for people, so it comes crumbling down. Well, I mean, you speak to people in Australia quite a lot, so you've got colleagues there yourself. At what point are they at right now in terms of like actively being able to help people who are being like so badly coerced and threatened there? It's and if people are watching and you don't really know what's going on in Australia, I really encourage you to take notice. It's just like a different level. That if you actually see some of these actual MPs and people, ministers, and people who are of real, you know, responsibility in the country, that just the absolute lies that are coming out of their mouths on TV, blatant lies. It's just
Shocking.
mind-blowing.
It's shocking. Well, it's unlawful, it's illegal, it's immoral, and it's unethical. Sorry to interject, but can I just take you back to your MP in your meeting, and then I'll tell you a bit more about Australia. The MPs who have voted for mandatory injections have absolutely revealed their hands as people who clearly don't care about the law. Now, I have a certain amount of sympathy for that, because whilst ignorance is no defense of the law is horribly complicated. And I don't expect anyone to know it off the top of their heads. None of us lawyers do. We have to look it up and we have to clarify, etc. But the point is, these MPs have a duty to uphold the law under their parliamentary oath and under their ministerial code. So your MP should be taking legal advice about the decisions that he's making, because his decisions are his personal and civil liability, right? So the fact that he's chosen to mandate injections means that if somebody gets injured or suffers death, etc., by the injection, and he's mandated it, he will also be standing trial for those criminal offences. So
and
again,
this is exactly the conversation
this is why we need to serve notices of liability, because I don't know where these MPs are getting their legal advice from. I have no idea, or whether they're taking legal advice at all. But most of them aren't lawyers. So how are they basing their decisions? How are they upholding the law when they're not taking legal advice and they're not lawyers? Because clearly they're either not taking legal advice or they're ignoring the legal advice, because no lawyer would be saying to them, yes, you can mandate vaccines because it's perfectly safe, it won't harm anyone, there won't be any criminal or personal liability flowing from your decision.
Yeah, and I think people like him are just really like foot soldiers. And my friend actually had a meeting with him first because he knows him, and his discussion was to do with vaccine passports and does he really understand the implications of them. And he said it was literally like talking to a kid that plays Xbox all day. He was really blasé about it. He was just like, I don't see what the big deal is, you know. So it's just an injection. We get injections all the time. So what if you've got to show a passport? Like you do it on if you want to go on some countries.
It makes me very angry.
And this guy is an MP for, you know, for the constituency where I live. So this is why I was so eager to go and see him. And if I need, I will take a notice of liability, and I'll tell him exactly why and exactly. I'm actually doing him a favour.
Yeah, but you know, that's why they swear a parliamentary oath, because it's not a day job where you don't care about what you do and you don't have to bother reading the law and you don't have to bother upholding it. You swear an oath to do so, right? And then there's that whole body of law which also that you have to uphold. So you don't get to not pay attention to the fact that you've just changed the law for all these people and people are dying from the mandate you've just voted for. It disgusts me, frankly.
Yeah.
But going to Australia, yes, lots of people in Australia are coming together. There are action groups and campaign groups. Various Australians have contacted me to help them run the informed consent campaign that we're running, about helping people understand this whole informed consent issue that we've just talked about. But also, I did see a clip of a group of people who were talking about the fact that they were going to be making citizens' arrests of the perpetrators, including public health officials, including ministers. And, you know, from the Australian public's point of view, the Coronation Oath, 1953, the monarch has sworn an oath to uphold the God's laws and the rules of the the Australian people as well. Specifically, read the oath. So any one of their ministers who's sworn an oath to uphold the coronation oath and the laws is also in breach of their oaths. And that's why the oaths are there. That we started off talking about the Hippocratic Oath. They're there because it shows that you have such a position of responsibility in your hand that if you abuse it, you can become a mass murderer. You can be responsible for huge miscarriages of justice if you've, you know, failing your judicial oath. You can, as a soldier, go out and commit mass murder and harm your people because you're not upholding your serve and protect oath, right? So this is, you know, we are, as a society, for over 2,000 years, have held the oath sacrosanct for that very reason. So what you say to your MPs and what you say to all these public officials is that anybody who has sworn an oath is now in breach of it. Anyone who's got a professional code of conduct in place, which will specifically set out all these laws and say you mustn't breach them, is in breach of their professional code of conduct, which means they can have their licenses removed, for example. They can be investigated for disciplinary action. And then anybody who's in a contractual relationship with you, they can't force it on you because that's not how contracts work. So there's a whole raft of safety mechanisms to stop what's happening from happening. So it's up to us, we the people, to uphold them all now. Everyone needs to stand in their sovereignty. We are all equal under the rule of law. Nobody gets to tell you what to do unless it's lawful. And you don't need to comply and do anything unless it's lawful. And it's only lawful if it's not going to harm you, cause you suffering, loss or death. So a lot of these measures that people are being asked to comply to and are afraid to stand up, they just need to stand in their own sovereignty and say, no, this measure is going to harm me. And unless you can prove to me that it's lawful, it's legal, it's moral, and it's ethical, then you don't get to tell me that I have to do this because you're telling me I have to do it. And that applies to the Prime Minister, that applies to the teacher, that applies to your parent, that applies to, you know, the policeman. We are all equal under the rule of law, and all of our rights are inalienable, they're fundamental, they're inviolable, and nobody gets to take them away. The only way that they are claiming they're able to take away our rights is because of this public health emergency. But there isn't a public health emergency on the evidence. So they don't get to do all this with our rights.
No, absolutely. And I think as well, because they've tested the public and they can clearly see that the majority comply. And I think
most people are nice. Yeah, most people want to help people and not harm them.
But that's where they've used the psychological warfare in terms of, like, you know, you need to do this to protect granny, you need to do this to protect your neighbor, you need to do this to protect everybody you walk past, so you need to wear your mask to protect others, you know. And that's when, if I spoke to a lot of people now in shops saying, can I just ask why you're still wearing your mask? You don't actually, you know, they've dropped the mask mandate. The majority will say, oh, you know, it's just to protect others. I'm like, well, if you've got no symptoms, why do you believe you're sick? And that's the psychological warfare that's been put on all our nation's people. And then the people in, you know, who are running this whole puppet show are literally sat there like this while everybody is, you know, in the middle of division, because you still.
Oh, you mean they're rubbing their hands at the £7 billion predicted face mask market and the £200 billion vaccine market? I'm sure they're rubbing their hands, whilst other people are losing their jobs and losing their lives.
Yeah, and people don't see it like that. They see it like it's what's happening in their life is for somebody else's gain on a mass level, on a mass scale. You know, it might make them see differently. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I genuinely do. But we're 18 months down the line, right? Now is the time to start thinking logic. Now is the time to take a step back and actually look at what is in front of you and ask better questions, ladies and gents. All right. If your friends or family aren't doing that, let's educate them on how they can do that, right? Let's not have a go at them. Let's not fall out with them. This is why I asked a question yesterday on the social media. How, you know, I said out of interest, how many people have you fallen out with in the last 18 months, friends or family, over what's happened? And I was very interested in like a lot of the answers, and it was a total, it was just a minefield of different answers. But a lot of people have totally been disowned by family. A lot of people were very much like try not to talk about it, so that caused division. But the fact of the matter is that the division is there. But what we can do to, I guess, build those relationships back is, or with other people, is to show them podcast videos like this with people like yourself. Show them like Dolores Cahill's interview last night. You know, show them all the other amazing work that some of the most qualified people in the world are trying to explain to them, and are being heavily censored. So instead of saying, well, they're being censored because they're talking shit, actually flip it on its head and say, why would someone go through all that trouble to censor that person in the first place because of what they're saying? And that we're seeing censorship like worldwide, like we've never seen it ever in history. Why are they doing that? And it's because we all know now, it's very clear and obvious. You've got to look back at Dr. Fauci's emails, that your Facebooks, your Googles, all your big tech, all your big pharma, all these big companies. You even have to look at like the MPs within these governments, within our own government, within the Australian government, the health minister of New South Wales. Her husband, funnily enough, is a large shareholder in Pfizer. It's just one thing after the other with these people. I said last night at Dolores Cahill, many people died on ventilators. Dyson were awarded a £345 million contract. A month before that contract was awarded, Boris Johnson's brother started working there. It's just, you know, you just got to, if you take the time to connect the dots and listen to the people who have done so much hard work like yourself, the logic is there in front of your face. And once you get there, ladies and gents, you'll be so glad you're there, and you will never turn back, ever. And that's why we are at where we're at now, and continuing to do so, to bring this light to the people who are listening now.
Yeah, God bless you for the work you're doing, AJ. But I tell you, picking up on what you were saying about oh no, I've lost it now. Gosh, I'm so tired. I've been up since 6 this morning.
you were saying thank you, AJ. This is the best podcast I've ever heard. It should be #1 in the Apple iTunes or something like that.
Oh no, about losing friends and family. And I laughed, and I thought, actually, I didn't mean to laugh because it's funny. I laugh because I myself have lost, you know, family and friends. Luckily with the family, it's healing again. But, you know, we had a falling out about taking the injections because I was desperately trying to persuade people that they needed to look at more evidence, etc. And I was shut down, and it caused problems. But, you know, virtually every single person I know has suffered some kind of friendship loss or family loss, and it's actually heartbreaking because, you know, to be fighting over whether or not you're right or wrong to take a particular injection seems to me to be absolute ludicrous. And yet that's what it's come down to. You know, you have people like Jennifer Aniston coming out and saying, well, I'm not going to be friends with anyone who's, you know, not vaccinated anymore. I mean, since when is that okay? I'm not going to be friends with you because you didn't take your annual flu injection. I mean, it's just craziness. And it's deeply disturbing because it's actually very reminiscent of what they did, of course, in the Third Reich, which was to create a group of people that they gradually made less and less and less acceptable for everybody else, that they become the other, which is a classic psychological technique used in society. Find a group of people, demonize them so that everyone ends up thinking of them as non-human. And then it's okay to treat them however you like. It's okay to eject them from bars and to make sure they can't go shopping and they can't take in normal life because, hey, they're not even really human anymore because of their, you know, their views, etc. It's exactly the same kind of thing that's happening.
Yeah.
So, you know, everyone's losing family and friends, and it's heartbreaking. And that's, you know, that's part of what's being perpetrated on us as a population.
Yeah. Again, it's all part of, it's almost like they've got like a little checklist of the stages that they need to do. I've said this for quite some time.
10 stages of genocide, that one you mean?
Yeah.
I think we're at number 7, aren't we, on the stages? Yeah.
Yeah, and even down to the vaccine passport side of stuff as well.
Show us your papers.
Yeah, honestly, guys, if I know the majority of people here listening are very much, or would imagine, are very much against vaccine passports, but I can tell you now, and you need to share this with for friends and family. This isn't just me saying it. This is what's going to happen. The minute we allow that to happen in our country, we've lost, say goodbye, because the freedoms that we once enjoyed and our forefathers fought for, okay, that's what some people were very quick to forget. People like myself, or tens and hundreds of thousands of others, millions of men and women who have gone overseas to fight for the freedoms of this country, you know, are going to be completely and utterly lost. And they've already done it from day one. They've seen, just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to see how far they can make this nation and the people go. And they just keep taking and taking and taking. And they've been doing it since day one. And majority of people are just letting it happen. Those of you who've got grandkids, those of you who've got young children who are the future of this country, you need to look at your children in the eyes and ask yourself, like, a picture of that potential of that child's future, and what does that look like? Not your own, the child's future, and what does that potentially look like? Okay, because as soon as you start doing that, then you'll start asking yourself some real questions, especially what's happening right now.
Can I talk about the vaccine passport quickly? Because
100%.
again, if you go back to the Hippocratic Oath, part of the Hippocratic Oath was that the physician would not reveal any of your medical information, your secrets, to anyone else. Fast forward to the Human Rights Act, where you have, you know, your right to privacy, including your most precious information, which is often your medical information, right? Which is sacrosanct between you and your physician and nobody else. They have to get your written permission to send your medical notes to anybody, to disclose anything about you. And under the Data Protection Act, we are protected from having our most sensitive information given out to people, like our phone number, let alone our medical status. So this whole idea that it's suddenly fine for everyone to know why you can't wear a mask, why you should, you know, what your test result is, what your vaccine status is. No, it's again a complete breach of our privacy laws. And again, these are MPs who don't know the law. If they've listened to if they've been given legal advice, they've ignored it. Because I tell you what, I know for a fact, because I was one of many, many people who submitted copious amounts of evidence and legal submissions to the committees calling for evidence on vaccine passports, where we told them all of this. We said this is, you know, we've made all these submissions to them. They're completely unlawful, they're illegal, they're immoral and unethical, and everything we've just talked about. And they've ignored it. And they're going ahead anyway. Why? Because it's part of the agendas. We know that Bill Gates' ID 2020, he wants us to be tracked and traced and surveyed biometrically from now on. You know, this is an agenda. People need to be clear about it. The idea that, oh, you're just waving some little documents that you can go into, you know, your festival. No. As you said, this is mission creep. This is, you know, to track and trace and survey everybody. You have their biometric data on there, your financial detail, everything. So you completely lost your autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
It's dystopian beyond your worst nightmarish belief.
Yeah. No, I truly believe that as well. I think time's going to be a healer for a lot of people in terms, and I mean mentally, in terms of people who have already gone out and been vaccinated, who will then turn around and go, wow, at the time I thought it was the best thing to do for my family and friends, etc., because that's what the majority of people have done. But then at a point when it's like, what have I actually done it for? And then now I've got to like look at what's happening in front of me, because that's where we're going to be at, because they're already priming, and that's all they've done psychologically, is primed the public every time they tell you what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And they're already telling about boosters. So come autumn, when they want you to all come and rush and get your boosters, unless you get your boosters, what's your vaccination status going to be? You're already in that vicious circle, A boosted vaccinated people are then going to start hating double jab people. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, it's just beyond crazy.
Well, I mean, they're making billions. Why would they stop that cash cow?
Yeah, and on last week's episode, Robert Malone, he actually came out and said that Dr. Fauci has stood there in front of an audience and said that they need to start looking at alternative treatments to the vaccines.
Really?
Yes.
What?
Yes,
like other people have been saying it since last April, the alternative treatment.
But here comes the but. He's not going to. He's not going to go running out and screaming either. You know what the rest of the word is, and HCQ, etc., etc. It'll be a Pfizer branded tablet of some sort. For people who don't like vaccinations or turn it down, so it's in their best interest.
But we already have drugs that are safe and effective and off license and therefore cheap and should be used, because again, we should not be denied treatment. And under the fully informed consent process, you're not giving fully informed consent if you haven't been told of the alternative available treatments. And people are not being told of the available treatments.
And these unfortunately, these available treatments will land a doctor in Australia 6 months prison sentence if they prescribe it. That's
what I would say to the doctor is go to court, take it. The court won't be able to win that. It's completely outrageous. Have you seen the Indian Bar Association's notice of liability to the chief scientific officer at the WHO? 50 pages of calling her out on why she suppressed the evidence about ivermectin. And, it's irrefutable. There are clinicians treating people around the world with ivermectin and finding that it's working and successful. Vitamin C, D, zinc, the Zelenko protocol. There are alternative treatments.
Absolutely.
So the only reason these vaccines have a license, they're not vaccines rather, but they've labeled them as such, even though they're actually regulated as human medicines, but they don't fit the definition of a human medicine under the human medicines regulations. They actually fit the definition of a medical device under the medical devices regulations. But even if they are regulated under the human medicines regulations, as they claim to be able to, license is only valid if there's no alternative treatments. And there are.
Fantastic.
So that's why it's being suppressed, clearly.
Anna, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for another night of amazing value here on the AJ Roberts Show. Guys, it's been a fantastic couple of days, obviously with Dolores last night and everything she shared. And now Anna has come on the show tonight to deliver all this valuable information about all the legalities and where we sit with so much of this tyranny. And let's face it, that's what it is that we face in different countries around the world. Just to let you know, Anna, the chat down the side of my page has just been inundated with people saying how amazing you are, and the amazing work that you're doing, and exactly, after the conversation we had last week, and then obviously hearing everything that you've had to say this evening, I echo what every single person listening has got to say, and let's hope that your team and people, like myself and loads of others out there who are doing some things to try and bring this charade down to its knees. We need to start taking some action, guys. But it all starts with you as an individual. It all starts when you start saying no. And that's the message we need to spread. You need to tell your friends and family, just say no, because at the end of the day, if you just keep complying, you're not breaking any laws. They're not laws that there isn't any laws that you're breaking. You're living your life, okay, whilst others are being taken away. That's what you need to remember, ladies and gents. Anna, where can everybody find you if they want to get hold of you? I don't mean your actual home address.
In the hills. Hiding under a bush. Well, I've started up a Telegram channel. Actually, it was my really good friend Simone Plout, who is working really well with together, bless her. A Telegram channel called the Informed Consent Campaign. So that one that people can find out. I can send you some links, actually. Maybe then you can share them. And then there's the Informed Consent Alliance website and the Lawyers for Action website. But as I say, it's under construction. So if people at the moment want to get hold of me, they'll probably have to get hold of me through Facebook, because I've been locked out of Twitter.
Naughty.
And we're in the process of setting. I've been locked out of Twitter. We're in the process, because I was saying too much. We're setting up an email for those two websites. So what I can do is I'll give all these links and emails to you, and then people can come to you, I guess, on your page to find them. Because this is literally work in progress, everybody. I'm sorry it's not all set up and running and sorted. Yeah,
and one of my good friends, David, who's actually living in France, is having a bit of a torrid time at the minute, bless him. He's actually just said, suggested for you to grow an email marketing list, because that way people can subscribe and you can just get this information out to tens of thousands of people very quickly. That'd be a very good idea. Obviously, we could chat about that more afterwards. But thanks for that valuable information there, David. That's a really good idea. Guys, if you've enjoyed the show, please let all your friends and family know. Share it to them, send it to their inbox, show it to them, put it in their face, whatever you need to do. We need to get these messages out to as many people as possible. If you haven't done so, please make sure you subscribe to the AJ Roberts Show YouTube channel. I'm also on Rumble, so just in case YouTube pulls me like they did with Dan Gregory, and obviously on Facebook. Zuckerberg seems to be quite nice to me. Like, I think he might want something. And on Instagram, as you can see on the screen, at Mr_AJ Roberts. As I mentioned last night, ladies and gents, a big part of what I do as well is I work with a fantastic charity called Male Cross Mission International. I'm a patron for the charity, and we work with the amputees and the rape victims of the Blood Diamond Civil War in Sierra Leone. Each year, we go out and do a medical mission, and we help hundreds of people during our period there. I was supposed to be going out this year. Obviously, that fell on its arse. But we're looking to go back in January. So what I've done is I've set up a Patreon account for the AJ Roberts Show. So if you are a fan of the show and you've enjoyed the value that has been brought, can I please ask, solely if you wish, to please become a patron of the AJ Roberts Show. For the price of a cup of coffee, you'll be donating to the medical mission, where we're going to help hundreds of people in Sierra Leone who are struggling with the current pandemic of there, not in a viral sense, but the fallout of obviously what's happening all around the world. People who already have absolutely nothing are being punished even further in a country that has already seen Ebola, civil war, mudslides, and obviously problems with poverty and malnutrition, etc. I'll put the Patreon link into my Facebook straight after this, guys. It's on the AJ Roberts Show on the YouTube channel. Have a nice evening. I'll get as many links and templates and everything to you as quick as I can through Anna. I'll probably put them on my own website as well, so it's a central place for people to go to. They can't censor me there. But I hope you've enjoyed tonight's episode, guys. I hope you got a lot out of it. Please give us some feedback. And I will see you tomorrow night. I won't be live. It's a pre-recorded episode. It had to be for, let's call it safety reasons. And I'll put a time out nearer the time as well, so you can jump on and watch it. But from me, come over to and chat to my DMs if you need help with anything. But for me and Anna, have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you next time, guys, on the Asian Rubbish.
Thank you. Can I just say thank you all ever so much for tuning in and listening. I'm really, really, glad that the comments say it's been helpful. So thank you ever so much.
Amazing. Thank you, Anna.